All right. Hey, everybody. Let's go over Victarion. So the Victarion chapter was, of course, a weird one because uh, we have the first part of the Victarion sample chapter from George. He read it at a con in March of 2012, 11 years ago. Um, and then the weird thing is that a few months later, about 2 months after that, he went to another con called MizCon in Missoula, Missouri, and he read the full thing. But we only had a fan summary and a very brief fan summary of the rest of the chapter. The fan summary essentially said Victarion gets bled by the Dusky Woman into a bowl. He then rubs the blood onto the horn and moans, my horn, my dragon." He then finger bangs the Dusky Woman with his bloody hand. And he specifically doesn't want to have sex with her because he thinks that going to war uh, um, or going to war after having sex will weaken him. And then he gets armor put on, and then he goes upstairs and has a rousing speech. So there wasn't much to go with. There wasn't much to push the plot forward. There wasn't much where you could push creativity and things like that. It was no one was looking forward to this chapter because it's essentially like, oh, Victarion's gonna creepily finger bang the Dusky Woman. Write a chapter on that, and I didn't want to do a chapter call for that, and so in the end, I was lucky that just a fan taking initiative wrote a chapter, James Worth, and submitted it, and we just kind of the editors and me worked with that and went on from there. Um, and so it was a really tough and just brutal chapter to kind of write. Like no one wanted to do it. Because it's just like, why would you want to do, why would you want to spend your time doing this? But this is what George R. R. Martin had read. This is what he planned. And so we kept true to that. And, we completed the chapter. Um, and so, I'm glad some people liked it in a brutal way. I mean, everybody's like, oh, this is brutal, but it like fits. But it's just, it's also that these, I've done really deep analysis um, on these Winds of Winter sample chapters from George, and they also all seem to just tread water. Like they're not advancing the plot forward too much. They either it's a lot of characters planning to do something, or it's a lot of characters summarizing what happened before. And so we get a lot of that in this Victarion chapter. I'll briefly go over the part that we know, the part that he read at the first con in March of 2012, where we actually have that recording and everything. Um, it's funny. I originally thought that maybe George didn't want to, didn't want to, didn't like the second part, and maybe that's why I didn't read it very much. But he actually read the full thing at the con after. He just never read everything since. But um, so going over the other stuff briefly. I mean, I go into a lot of detail with this in prepping for winter, but we start out with Victarion, and the noble lady was atop of a ship. This being a clear parallel to what is going on with Aaron over in the Red Wine Straits. There's also a big ship and a lot of uh, um, smaller ships around, and it also calls back the Blackwater, where in the holds in the Blackwater you had Wildfire in a civilian ship. Here, the civilian ship has armed men. At the battle in Red Wine Straits, I think the holds are filled with blood, but that's more of a theory. But the idea is that this is just calling back um, uh, the Blackwater essentially, which there's so many Blackwater parallels with the Battle of Fire. Just the Skahazadon being the same as the Blackwater, and the Bridge of Ships, and all sorts of things going on. And here, of course, the noble lady getting into just Victarion sexism, and his sexism being really such now a central part of his character. Keep in mind that he was not able to become king because of his sexism and rejecting Asha, and he's crippled um, by Euron psychologically the feelings of inadequacy regarding his wife and everything. And so it just so much of this is that the horn is a dick, like the horn's a dick, like, and Victarion thinks he's got a big dick now because he's got this big horn. And like when you break down it in that kind of simple terms, like the chapter is just kind of like ridiculous. And I actually, like, one of the comments on it was like, oh man, wasn't this dick imagery a little thick? And I was like, that's George, like that's George. Or like, wasn't this my precious Gollum imagery a little thick? That's George, when he's sitting there rubbing blood up and down a big horn going, yeah, my dragons, my horn. Like, he already established that. You can't like not, you can't go walk away from the very clear imagery there. But anyway, he starts out with the wolf one ear, which is a connection to Hoster Frey, who also has one ear up in the Battle of Ice and things like that. And he sends him off to command and do this other stuff with the hiding in the holds, which is like the Blackwater. And then, they're latching on to the noble lady, just like they're all trying to latch on to Daenerys, a noble lady, and things like that, and stuff like that. And then he gives the best fighters to Wolf, which I do. Victarion, we have Victarion mention that later on, but I do wonder if this is going to be a thing that Victarion has given away his best fighters, and so he then feels kind of conflicted about war, feeling eager, but at the same time sad because he's thinking about he actually does, even though Victarion's very screwed up, he does still feel guilty about the things he's done. He's not a man, he's not a complete utter psychopath where he doesn't think about people's feelings. He thinks about it, which makes him even more crazy. I mean, Sari being the primary one that we know about that just gets in his head. But this is a big callback to the House of the Undying, which is very interesting considering that George originally wanted Victarion to die, meaning Euron was probably the one fulfilling the prophecy at the House of the Undying, and now it's kind of clearly Victarion because this is the vision of the man with the lips bright-eyed on the prow of a ship that Daenerys sees in the House of the Undying. But this is, again, a lot of a summary of what Euron did. Oh, he stole and he soiled her. It's interesting reading there were the notes on A Dance with Dragons that his editor gave George. And the editor in general gives George very few notes, but one note that was given to him was, you have to remember a lot of time has passed between books and a cold reader isn't going to know what's going on. Like, you need to do a little bit of summary. And so he did add a bunch of summary to a lot of his chapters at the beginning of A Dance with Dragons, so that to bring people up to speed, rather than just like getting right into the action. And so now I think George actually has way too much of it with the Winds of Winter. And so then we get on to Longwater Pike, which is kind of a new character in A Dance with Dragons. We don't know much about him. And then he has him go get the three thralls who he then shows the horn to, and he makes a big deal about how big this horn is, and it's a clear parallel to the Horn of Winter, which we should remember the Horn of Winter that Mance Rayder had didn't have any power at all. Like it was a magic feather designed to like unite people and we should at least entertain the possibility that this horn has no power whatsoever. Despite people acting weird at the Kingsmoot, they might have just gotten bribed and really liked Euron's speech, So they go into, he starts telling the story about how magical and how cursed it is and how big it is, and Euron being a fool. And you don't know why he's actually telling this to the thralls. It seems to be actually convince himself that this is really, really quite important, and that he will now rule the world if he has this horn. He's convincing himself. I think it's really funny that Claghorn here, that he mentions the horn blower. He he gets his name wrong. The guy's name is Cragorn, but it says Clagorn, and that's an intentional mistake. George says that when he reads it, he says Clagorn instead of Cragorn. But he just believes the story. He has no proof that the guy actually died. Um, so it'd be funny if he's actually still alive, but clearly Victarion thinks it. And so he says, his whole plan is maybe if you each sound it once, that you won't die, like Cragorn did, and then he mentions, like the monkeys on the Isle of Cedars, which I always bring up Chekhov's bacon, and the importance of the hulls in the Iron Fleet having pork, because that might actually lure a dragon and allow people to capture him with the same grappling hooks that he mentions here, latching on to the noble lady and stuff. So they have all the tools. Everything is set up for a dragon capture without any magic. He has all the tools there to just capture a dragon. He's got a bunch of pork and he's got a bunch of grappling hooks and chains. Like they can, it's all it's all there. It's all there. So Makoro's eyes seem to shine. I see dragons. And this is the end of what we have for George. So we go on to our new material that we kind of created. And so we want it to be very exciting and gross and sexual and arousing. And so the first thing we went with is the dusky woman went to her knees once the priest was gone. Obviously, when a woman goes to her knees, your mind immediately goes to fellatio. It immediately gets sexual when you hear a woman goes to her knees, and that's kind of what we were going for. But we wanted things to be very kind of very alluring and sexual here. She brushed aside her salty hair and looked up at Victarion. The idea of this is also like getting very gross. Like a woman looking up at a man from a kneeling position is very, very sexual. But then it gets violent too, because she offers this dagger, and there's this mystery of like she offers this dagger. Victarion never saw where she took it from, and it's like this adding this extra like danger to her. Like how did she get this dagger? Like what? So then he plops this scorched palm above her breast. And the idea is that he's plopping it down, like he's plopping down a dick, hanging in above her woman's breasts. I mean, this is getting sexual here. Then we call back Sari. No sign of Sari's cut, but the pain was proof that it hadn't healed, which is a funny thing, like what is going on? Because we know that he needed to be bled, but Makoro supposedly healed him. We have this contradiction before, like is Victarion healed or not? And so we kind of build more on that contradiction, that it hadn't healed even though it's healed, and so the magic weakens. So he says, the fire god flickers in the wind, or perhaps R'hllor requires more sacrifices. I'll give him more soon enough. And then the dagger traced along the line, and Victarion doesn't feel anything, which is, this double meaning. Like he's not feeling anything emotionally, or he's not feeling any pain physically, or he doesn't feel anything emotionally when someone harms him, because Victarion, he's ready to die. He doesn't value his life anymore. He's ready to die in glory. And then we get into some kind of mystical stuff. He stood rigid and watched a puff of smoke rise out of the cut. That's a little bit of a supernatural element, but we keep it at a minimum, because we've seen this stuff before about the puff of smoke, playing with the idea of like what it could be other than magic. As some sort of glamour. Could it be dust or spores or something? I don't know, but we put a little supernatural element in there. And smells of ash and rotten eggs. Obviously, rotten eggs is sulfur. The blood welled up thick in his palm and oozed out between his fingers, dripping in the stone bowl. This is this idea that, like, the blood is, idea that the blood is like semen as well. It's dripping and oozing, and some splattering, and then in madness, the red droplets start writhing and squirming away like fleeing roaches. This is similar to like the idea about Arya Targaryen returning from Valyria and having these weird wiggly things that are, but of course, like maybe it's all in Victarion's head. We have no idea. So he shuddered. And and she's looking up at him, ink, eyes black as ink. And then this is a nice. This used to be, he took the bowl from her, but then one of the editors was like, "Isn't it better if he like yanks it?" And we kind of get the idea that he's just feeling like emotional and um, insecure about everything, insecure about the fact that he might have felt scared for a moment in front of this woman. Um, and so then, he looks at the horn, and his reflection is staring back at him, warped and curved. It's just kind of this idea that, he's seeing the ugly aspect of himself there. And then the glyphs are red and gold. This is actually kind of repetitive because we've heard a lot about these glyphs, but nonetheless, it's time here. And then we hear about the horn. He thinks that perhaps they're going to glow white and suck the life from these thralls, that they're going to be sacrifices. Blood for fire, fire for blood. Victarion poured the blood over the ruins, and then he dropped the empty bowl. He would claim it. He had to be sure. And then he slaps it, and you kind of get this, like, again, sexual imagery, like slaps during sex, slapping, and slapping the horn, and her giving this the start of fear, almost like he slapped her butt or something. It was hot to the touch. Earlier he already talked about it being like warm as the dusky woman's thighs, so it's like we don't want to repeat ourselves, but with his descriptions and stuff. But so we kind of mentioned the Dragon Queen this time about her skin. And then it gets very sexual at this point. He's grimacing, and he's pushing the hand forward slowly, then back, painting thick all around. He's essentially just masturbating with the horn, And through the pain, he could feel his hand grow stronger as he rubbed, the grip more firm, steady strokes. And then he's like, "My horn," up and down, "my horn," brimming with desire. It's pretty. The double entendre is pretty thick. And then he removes his hand, and the viscous strands stretch out between the horn. It's just kind of, very gross and sexual. These, and then he looks down at the dusky woman, and she's still kneeling, and so he's like, "Okay, I'm your new master." And then things get violent, and he like chokes her with his hand, and then all of a sudden does not. Which is essentially the story of the dusky woman. Victarion is unsure why he hasn't killed her yet, and the blood dripping down between her breasts and stuff. And then open your legs. She disrobes, and at this point, we just decided we're gonna get as uncomfortable as possible. So we're like, fine, you know what? The dusky woman is on her period, and kind of the reason we do this is just for some ambiguity about what's going on with blood. It's like, one, it's just kind of like creepy. It's just, I mean, there's nothing wrong or creepy about being with a woman when she's on her period. It's just, but like in major religions, there's always this like big taboo against it, and so it's just one of those extra things of like, oh, this is a weird sexual situation. He's got a big bloody hand, and she's menstruating, and it's just gonna be it's getting all weird. The major religions are very weird about women's menstruation and cleanliness and stuff like that. So we just decided that this is gonna make the whole situation weird and uncomfortable. So she's bleeding and he's bleeding, and the religion is telling him, his damp hair warns him that she's not clean. And then he's like, when are women ever clean? Because Victarion's a horrible sexist. And then Victarion's aroused by it all because it reminds him of battle, and that arouses him. And Victarion's just now screwed up, like everything's screwed up. And then it goes even further. And one of the editors was like, wouldn't it be, shouldn't we have like some like sailing metaphors when it comes to sexual organs and such? And it's like, what about like little mates? And it's like, well, yeah, we could do little mate, but that's almost like playful. So if it's going to be playful, we now have to bring it back down to creepy. So it's like, we mention her little mate and emerging beneath the boat's sail, which is the clitoris emerging from the clitoral hood. Um, but then that's a little too funny and lighthearted, so it's like we immediately got to go back to, oh, under the old way they used to practice FGM, and which this is essentially for cultures today that still practice FGM. This is for the most part why it's done. That the to prevent the girls from growing lustful, so that because they'll dishonor their kin if you leave the clitoris is on them, and so it's pretty brutal. Though the old way is thousands of years ago. What's kind of funny is that FGM is so prevalent in the world today, and this was thousands. This is supposedly him thinking about practices from thousands of years ago. Amongst the Greenlanders, men, and then we just get back into some kind of his disgust for like oral sex, which is again like gets down to brutal sexism. This is more something like from like that I've just noticed in life, is that the people I know that like men that I know that are against giving oral sex tend to be really misogynistic men, and so it just seems like Victarion would be the type of guy that would be like, why would I ever do that? Which gets into like John and Ygritte and how she's like, is this what the lords do? So it's like him saying like in the Greenlanders, men were known to lick the boy the way a dog greets its master, like some sort of like horribly weird misogynistic way to try to like degrade people that participate in oral sex. So he's just disgusted by the idea, and then it just gets worse, and then he pushes inside her and he's adding fingers and twisting sharply. This is actually kind of a parallel to Cersei and Taena, where Cersei tries to essentially have her way with Taena violently, the way Robert would have his way with whoever. And what's funny is that Cersei does her best to try to be cruel, and I think Taena just kind of likes it. She doesn't even like think that Cersei's being like, Cersei completely fails in her attempt at being a rapist or whatever. It's kind of weird. And then he says no. Originally, there was a line in here that he knocked away her dagger. That somehow she had the dagger and then he just knocked it away, and there was something more kind of exciting and violent in there. But one of the editors was like, this just brings up too many questions. Like, how did she disrobe with a dagger in her hand? Is Victarion really dumb enough to like not to like see the dagger and then not punish her later about it? Just yes, it's an exciting line, but it brings up far too many questions. And so I was like, all right. Even though I really like the idea that they're in the middle of like, this sexual moment, and he sees that she's got a dagger and is like knocks it out of her hand, and then somehow this woman got a dagger. I mean, or but nonetheless, it does bring up too many questions. Then people are puzzled a little too much. So anyway, blood all over. If she had a tongue, she would have screamed. Somebody pointed out, can't you scream without a tongue? And I was like, yeah, it's a good point. It's a good point. I'm gonna chalk this up to Victarion not knowing if you can scream with a tongue or not. And then we get to more ridiculous sailing metaphors. His manhood was a bowsprit. The bowsprit is the on the front of a ship, the pointy wooden spear thing. And so like Victarion has not been this hard since he was a boy, because he's just all this sexual inadequacy. I mean, so much of the story is about Victarion's sexual inadequacy. So it's just, of course, he's like in the middle of this like horrible, gross, blood-filled violence. He's like, it's the only time he can get it on. And then we get into this paragraph is really about how screwed up Victarion is. But this one, because you got to remember, it starts with him being super hard, and then he starts talking about how he needs to make the dusky woman see who's boss, who the true king is, and then it kind of transitions slowly from women, because he's like his dragon queen and his brazen niece, like the other women that he needs to show, because he's imagining himself banging them. And then the Greenland ladies with their plump bodies and powdered faces. And then it transitions to their husbands too. So now he's having sex with he's imagining himself having sex with the husbands, weak men, soft, never knowing pain. In some of the submissions, or no, I'm sorry, in there's only one submission. In the original submission, there was some mention of Maester Kerwin, but um, just didn't kind of flow like what too much because he's kind of a nothing character. And then it gets even grosser. He would beat the smile off the boy king, as we're talking about Tommen, squeeze Stannis Baratheon's neck until his face went purple. I mean, this is essentially squeezing a dick until it gets purple. Like he's imagining Stannis Baratheon as a dick. And then we get to the Crow's Eye, and we just, his own brother, and the things you do to him. It's just a little ambiguous, whether you're how much in the sex are you still, but it's Victarion's screwed up. More sailing metaphors, boat metaphors. Victarion knew not to unship his oar. That's essentially pull his dick out of his pants. He had not cresting the wave orgasm. In a lot of cultures, the metaphor for, I mean, I guess in our own too, we talk the climax is the top of a wave. In many cultures, orgasms are called waves, or like in Chinese, it's gao chow, the tall wave, and spend his vigor on the wench before fighting began. Only fools fucked before battle. This is straight up George R. R. Martin insisted this be part in it. And so then we're like, well, why? Well, the salt of a man's seed is the salt of a sea. This is kind of made me think of I think I'm first reminded of this in Doctor Strangelove. Like I think Doctor Strangelove, he talks about like one of the characters, the guy that's against fluoride in the water and all this. I think he's like a retaining your chi kind of guy, that like you're giving up your strength by orgasming and giving up your nutrients or something crazy like that. And so this is Victarion, how screwed up he is. And so Tarl thrice drowned is we just needed another. He's another one of the drowned men. So there's power in the sea. He has some weird screwed up reason for feeling that he shouldn't climax because there's power in his seed. Yeah. So it's just we're like, how much more can we get into how screwed up Victarion is? And so then we get to the armor part, which, we know that the Dusky Woman puts him in armor afterwards. So he says, oh, get me my, hauberk, be quick. A trail of blood following her. And then I thought, it'd be kind of funny to have it a little ambiguous on the claiming of the horn. So he stands up and he wipes his hand clean on the hell horn. And it's like, her blood is all mixed in there too. So who knows about like the claiming of horns at this point. Dusky Roman returns. Victarion lets out the grunt that he puts on the chainmail. It's just this, how screwed up he would be that somehow like slipping into armor is so much more pleasurable than slipping into a vagina, So it's like, he's just like, oh yeah, the armor, like just more screwed up stuff. So he brings him, the Polyans, the Coiters, the Greaves, savoring the fit of each piece. And then it's like he let her put some things on him. So, she is able to put on his corsets and his breastplate and backplate and stuff like that. Then we just thought it would be interesting to get into some ambiguity about the Dusky Woman's backstory. At this point, I remember that the chapter was pretty short because, it's like when you're talking like, okay, you want to get this thing up to like, minimum of 3,000 words or something. And George has written 1,200 and you've got to fill in another 2,000 words. And it's like, what you got to go with? Like, you want 2,000 words of Victarion finger banging the Dusky Woman? Because, we did as much as we could. Like how much more, like how much more, like I realized like, oh my god, like we went on for a good page and a half, 2 pages about Victarians, you know, wiping blood, like masturbating with a horn and fingering the dusky woman. Like, how many more words can I put to this? So it's like almost was like, okay, what else can we talk about here? So let's get into the dusky woman's backstory because just a little more on the dusky woman here because she's a mysterious character. So, um, finally, Victorian's kind of wondering why do you know how to put on armor so well? Who are you? We got a little tease here. She was no one. We haven't decided, or no one's decided if she's a faceless man or anything like that. But nonetheless, like this little line makes people wonder. Oh, she was no one. And then it's like, are you from Nath? Are you from the Summer Islands? Like where could you be? And then we kind of get back like, okay, heading back, isn't it kind of logical that Victarion would pass by Nath and the Summer Islands? Like maybe that'll be where the next Victarion chapter will take place. Because he wouldn't want to go back the way he came, um, with the Volantene fleet. So it would kind of make sense, and then we can deal with all these lost characters like Red Ralph Stonehouse and all the missing ships and things like this. So it's just setting up here as well, like while we're talking about the Dusky Woman. Then we get the helmet last. Victarion's helmet has been described in a previous chapter as a kraken with tentacles, so he has that put on. And then all we have is he gave a rousing speech, and so they're like, oh god, this is really tough as well because we have Victarion's previous rousing speech, which is at the King's Moot, and it's crap. Like Victarion goes up there and it's like, yeah, you know me and you know Balon and I'm more of the same. And that's essentially his speech. Like Asha has a pretty good speech. Euron has a freaking great baller speech. And Victarion's speech is horrible. So all of a sudden, like Victarion out of character needs to do a rousing speech. Like what's in his fashion? What's in his character? So we had him go upstairs and everybody's scared because they saw one of the dragons flying. And, these are all cowards because everybody went with Wolf One Ear. And so all of these characters that were listed here are actually from the appendix of A Dance with Dragons. Tom Tidewood, Stefan Stammerer, Quellen Humble. Quellen Humble is the most interesting because he's actually one of Euron's men at the King's Moot. And for some reason, he's on Victarion's ship. So he's one to watch. Tom Tidewood, Stefan Stammerer. And then you kind of get this idea of like Victarion coming to the same conclusions that Aegon came to with the help of Tyrion. Like, you can't go to Daenerys like the beggar. You need to have Daenerys come to you. And Victarion coming to the same conclusion. Is it even in Victarion's character as a huge sexist to come to her, the beggar, like with this fleet? Um, he wants her to come to him, right? And so it kind of makes sense that he would twist around to Aegon, to young Griff's mindset that she needs to come to me, So, and then he kind of says, how do you give a rousing speech unless he really reveals some of his plan? And so, we kind of have Victarion reveal to everybody that, yeah, I plan on at least like claiming the dragon myself, possibly usurping Euron. This is kind of the first thing that he's kind of revealing to them. And so, Victarion's very honest. So he's just like, yeah, when he went to the King's Moot, he was like, yeah, Balon, I'm just more of the same. That's overly honest. And here he's doing the same. He actually paints a very bleak picture. He's like 50,000 Yunkishmen before us, 500 Volantene warships are at our backs. It's probably overestimating, but he wants to be honest. And then he just says, I come to lead you into battle, not coddle you like squalling babes. At my bosom, you won't find the mother's milk of heartening words. For me, salt water flows. I give you the truth. Um, so, and if you want to get even more into the sexual aspect of it, he had established that like, his semen was the salt water, but I didn't really think about that until later. I was like, oh God, did he just say that like I don't have mother's milk, I've got semen? Like, oh God, or is he actually saying that like from his teat, salt water like flows as if like somebody's gonna be breastfeeding from on Victarion, salt water is gonna come out. Um, uh, you all know what happens when we come to morn. We break our fast on glory. Um, and so we have this little idea that Wolf One Ear is the distraction so that he can land and blow his horn and await the dragons coming so that he can claim them. And so we pick the sail behind. These are the swiftest ships here: Iron Wind, Sparrowhawk, Kraken's Kiss, and then them having a perimeter. And when the dragon's close, I'll bring them out the horn. And then he kind of says, it doesn't matter if you die tomorrow or if you're with me, like you get to feast. Like you either feast in the Drowned God's watery hall or you're going to feast with me. Not, as champions, like none of us will ever hunger again. So 3 dragons, 2 gods. Longwater Pike begins to chant: 3 dragons, 2 gods, 1 king. And the gust of wind blows and Makoro is there and the gods are with him. Let the world beware is a line from the Reaver chapter. Euron actually says when the Kraken marries the dragon, let the world beware. So Victarion is like, let the world beware. He says, raise the banners. Time Tidewood actually is the guy who sewed stuff before. So Time Tidewood is the logical person who sung these banners. And then we have the Reaving Song where I had the this is again like trying to have something interesting and because considering that all we were given on an outline is Victarion finger bangs the Dusky Woman, write a chapter. So try to add some more interesting things in here. So we have the Ironborn shanty. The interesting thing about Victarion here is that so the Ironborn Cold Danelle is this story about a stillborn girl and a father's anguish. Victarion's first wife died in childbirth with a stillborn girl, and we don't like flat out say this here. You have to remember it from a previous chapter. But yeah, when he's thinking of his wives, past and future, like Cold Danelle is like specific. Like, of course, it's specifically going to bring up the pain for Victarion and his fury of his first wife and his first stillborn daughter. And there's a bit of weirdness as well with the now I understand it's a little weird, like it may seem a contradiction that Victarion is such a woman hater and the Ironborn are such women haters that they would have this song about mourning this dead daughter. But there is this odd perception of what the pure woman is, and the pure woman that needs to be put on a pedestal that chauvinists kind of create in their mind. And that's the weird screwed up part about Cold Danelle and like why I wrote this song is that like Cold Danelle is the perfect girl because she's dead. She's innocent, she's a virgin, she's in a sense like the biggest sexists kind of understand that, or the biggest sexists believe that men going forth in life can bring glory to your family, but girls, they can only bring you shame. There's nothing that they don't really have much agency to bring glory to your family, in sexist societies. They can screw up and have sex before marriage, or screw up and do something, get into trouble with politics or something, get arrested. There's a lot of ways they can dishonor you, but there's not many ways they can honor you. When to a sexist, a son can go off and be successful, but a daughter, what can she do? She can get married and have kids, So this is why they like try to marry him off young and have him, oh, my daughter's doing really well. She got married and she had 8 kids, So, but Cold Danelle is like that. Part of it is in that. It's like, yes, like Victarion is upset that his wife is dead and his daughter is dead. Like, but at the same time, like there's this idolization of the perfect virgin girl, and the perfect virgin girl is a dead one to these sexists because they can never be corrupted, and um so some people are like, I don't understand, like, is cold denial a contradiction? Is it just because everything's so screwed up? And it's like, well, it's not really a contradiction. It's about how it's about where women exist in the minds of and women's roles in the minds of the chauvinists and things like that. Um so yeah, it's weird. It's weird. This whole chapter is just weird. And then they sang All the Way to Marine. Um, yeah, I mean, overall, it's a creepy, uncomfortable chapter. It was not, it was not my favorite to work on. Uh, um, there's just a lot of restrictions on where you could take characters and have things come together and feel closure and um, I don't know. It just the plot doesn't really go that very far, and it's just kind of creepy and gross. And I guess it fits, but it's certainly not one of those chapters where like, well, man, what a what a great chapter. It's not like the Bravo or the prologue or Lane 2 where I'm just like, oh wow, we made a really great story and this came together and what a fantastic read. This, I just, I'm like, well, we got through it. I think it came out better than I expected. Like, I do think like it's got some great lines, and we get into some creepiness and weirdness of Victarion's character, but it was just we were restricted by George's outline. Like, when you really think like, okay, your outline is a chapter about Victarion finger banging the dusky woman. How can you make that great? And this is the best we could do. I still, I appreciate all the work like um James Worth and the editors did. It's but man, it's like what can you do? What can you do? Write a chapter about a Victarion masturbating with a horn and finger banging the dusky woman. Ugh. But there it is. There it is. We got through it. We got through it. It exists. But thank you all for reading and listening to me talk about this uncomfortable chapter. I'll see you guys next time.